Hello everyone, my name is Alyssa Miller and I'm giving this presentation with my group mates Andrew Clegg and Kristen Little. We'll be talking generally, I guess, about Anne Rice in the Vampire Chronicles, and then I'll be really tackling kind of an introduction to Anne Rice, what kind of things she writes, and what her life has been like. So let's get started. So Anne Rice was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. As you can see, it really forms the backdrop for a number of her novels, including Interview with the Vampire. And she also grew up in an Irish Catholic household. She cites her father as a big inspiration for training her to write because he was a World War II veteran, and upon returning, he decided to write his daughters a novel called The Impulsive Imp to try and bond with them. She then went on to school at both the Texas Women's College University and then moved to California and went to San Francisco State. She obtained an undergraduate degree in political science and then master's degrees in English and creative writing. She also met her husband and they got married when she was 20. His name was Stan Rice, and he was a pretty prolific poet and artist, and then later went on to become a professor at San Francisco State. Interview with the Vampire was Anne Rice's first published novel. She published it in 1976, and she later followed it up with a number of sequels that are now known collectively as the Vampire Chronicles. So they mostly center around the same main characters as Interview with the Vampire, specifically Lestat, though Louis or Louis does reappear throughout them. And the most recent addition to the series was actually published only 2 years ago in 2018. So if you want to get into it and read all of them, you definitely can. She did at one point say she was done writing them. She didn't know how she was going to come back to writing them. And then recently came back, and that was then published 3 more. She's also written a number of other novels, some of which were standalone books. So her second novel was about free people of color in Louisiana and was called The Feast of All Saints. She published that in 1979. She also wrote some erotic novels under a pseudonym and a number of books centering on just kind of the supernatural in general, so werewolves, witches, genies, that kind of thing. Her website lists her as the author of over 30 novels, which I find kind of amusing because, obviously you can count up her number of books. She knows how many books she's written, but she's just become such a prolific author that at this point she just says over 30. And her son, Christopher Rice, is actually also a best-selling novelist and a podcaster slash kind of YouTube show host. And he often features his mother on the show to talk about her books and things like that. One thing that comes up really frequently when you're reading biographies or just going on her website, things about her that's really important, is reviews on religion, which has really evolved over time. It has impacted both her work and really her public persona. While she grew up Roman Catholic, Rice became an atheist after her mother's death when she was a teenager, and she remains a Catholic for a majority of the period of time in which she's writing the Vampire Chronicles, Interview with the Vampire, and she says, kind of the views that she puts in those books are really influenced by her view of the world at that time. But then she returned to Catholicism in the 1990s, and she writes 2 books detailing the life of Jesus Christ. These come out in the early 2000s, and they're kind of adventure novel slash biographies of Jesus. So the first is called Christ the Lord Out of Egypt, and then Christ the Lord, The Road to Cana. And one of them was recently actually made into a movie. I think it's called The Young Messiah. And then she followed these up with a memoir about her religious journey. But then in 2010, Rice publicly announced that she had left organized religion and Christianity, but remained committed to Christ. She just doesn't like being associated with mainstream Christianity or mainstream Christian religion. And then in an interview with NPR, she cites a number of reasons, but one of them specifically is the church's pretty public stance on LGBTQ individuals as being sinful, and she cites it something as she can't be associated with the church because of it. And just kind of publicly disagrees with them. But she does say in interviews, that she has a relationship with Christ and that she thinks it impacts the books she writes now and the kind of, views that she puts into them. So my other 2 presenters are going to talk a little bit about Anne Rice when she was writing Interview with the Vampire, and then about Interview with the Vampire and kind of some of its connections and the impact it's had on other vampire works. Please stay safe, everyone. Stay inside. and follow CDC guidelines about social distancing. Bye.